What's the largest Atari 2600 game? Well, this Zonox double ender has got to be in the running when it comes to physical size. 2 games in one, but well, let's stay away from this whole area. What about ROM size? That's what I really want to get into. What's the biggest game in terms of data storage space? Well, it's one of 2 new games from Audacity, which both clock in at 128 kilobytes. The biggest games on the system, and let's look at Casey's Gold because that is the most recent, coming out in 2024. Yes, the high concept title for this video is Atari 2600 games, but they keep getting smaller, and so the very largest I can find is the obvious place to start. Would that I could tell you how good this game is. Sadly, I don't have a copy of it myself, so this footage comes courtesy of YouTuber Arcade USA, whose contribution is gratefully received. I did email Audacity Games asking for a review copy, but they never got back to me. Understandable really, you don't run a business by giving away your product for free. I could buy it, but it's physical copies only, and it is $60 plus shipping and probably UK taxes too, more than I want to spend on something for a brief video appearance like this. I nearly did buy it, but then I got Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 instead, which, as much as I love classic games, seems like a better investment. Anyway, 128 kilobytes is big for an Atari game, but not that big in the grand scheme of things. The same size as NES Classic Contra, and about 800,000 times smaller than the aforementioned Kingdom Come 2. By all accounts though, Casey's Gold is a good game, and the size is all that is unusual about it. No secrets buried in the cartridge but the big ROM. It could have come out during the 2600's commercial life. Not the case for all the games on this list. For the full details, why not watch Arcade USA's review? It's definitely worthwhile. But what is the next size down? Well, there is a couple of 2600 games that clock in at 64 kilobytes, and the best of these, and the one that I can actually play, is a fairly recent homebrew, Zippy the Porcupine. Yes, a certain hedgehog is the obvious inspiration here. This is a Sonic-style game for the 2600, and a huge one at that, not just in ROM size, but also in content. Yes, it's lost a little in translation, but wow, this is definitely impressive for a 2600 game, and it's even got horizontal scrolling, a rarity on this system. Casey's Gold doesn't have it for all its high production values. It's very difficult to pull off on the 2600's primitive hardware, which was not built with scrolling graphics in mind. Still though, you might wonder where that 64K goes. Super Mario Bros. On the NES is even more detailed, and that fits into just 40K. This is a little less complex than that. Why does it take up more space? Well, number one is probably that this is written in Atari Basic, the modern 2600 development language, which does make it much easier on the programmer, but might not be as compact as developing in pure assembly. But also the 2600 is probably just less efficient when it comes to complex games like this. It lacks the tile-based graphics architecture of the NES, which bakes in a fair amount of space saving just by the way it's organised. Also though, the 2600's bank switching probably doesn't help, and this game's 16 4KB banks probably means quite a big overhead, and that's likely still true as we drop down in size once more. But hold on, just before I get to that, let's have a quick word from our sponsor for this video, Fume. Fume is a flavoured air device, and flavoured air is quickly becoming like the alternative for your bad habits like vaping, except it's vapour free and it's nicotine free. The idea is that it gives you something that's satisfying to hold to fill the void left behind by ditching your vape, and it is very satisfying to hold, very clicky and tactile, and I love how high quality this thing feels, and I love the magnetic stand that you can get for it as well. There's no battery, no charging, just some really great guilt-free flavours with natural ingredients. It's ready to go right out of the box, and if you just miss having something in your hands, this does the job nicely, and it works out at a fraction of the cost of those vices that you might want to leave behind. Go to tryfume.com/Chiropolis or scan the QR code and use code Chiropolis to get your free Fume topper when you order your journey pack today. So thank you, Fume, and let's ease back into the topic at hand. So where were we? Well, we were at 32 kilobytes, and that brings us to Fatal Run. From 1989, this is a very late release indeed, part of Atari's last final push of the aging 2600, which was somehow still viable as a budget console at the end of the 80s. Or at least it was in parts of Europe where this saw its only official release. The game itself is a sort of futuristic vehicle combat racing game, cruise down the road, bash the other cars and get to the next level. Is this a good game? Well, maybe, but it is the largest official release from the classic era. But there are plenty of more modern games that are also 32 kilobytes. 32K is a popular size for homebrew, and Galagon is one of my favourites. Yes, a tribute to Namco's Galagon, a long overdue version of this Atari 2600 contemporary arcade game. Prequel Galaxian saw a release on this console, but no Galaga, and this modern take really does do the game justice. It does have a little help though, thanks to the DPC Plus chip, a modern ARM-based co-processor used by quite a few homebrews to enhance the system's capabilities. According to creator John Champeau in comments on the Atari Age forum, the 2600 could probably do a reasonable version of Galaga without the DPC Plus chip, but it adds the graphical icing on the cake and makes development easier. The system's CPU needs to take a very active role in drawing any sort of complex graphics, requiring very tight timing to be able to do that alongside any other tasks needed to run the game as well. The DPC Plus is able to effectively override the CPU and send data to the 2600's very primitive graphics chip directly, faster than the CPU can do on its own. The glittering starfield here is thanks to that extra processing power. The CPU alone can't draw so many pixels that small across the whole screen. Alongside Galagon, Stay Frosty 2 is another personal favourite of mine, in fact, one of my absolute favourite 2600 games, full stop, created by another Atari luminary, Darryl Spice Jr. A ridiculously fun game with an original platforming premise. Jump around putting out the flames with your snowman body whilst re-icing yourself with the slabs littered around the stages. Yes, this is another DPC Plus game, and here the chip is put to rather loud use with appropriately festive music, again something the 2600 can't do on its own, which, well, it does grate a little bit, the only downside to this really great game. What about Stay Frosty 1? Well, that is 16 kilobytes, and we're not quite there yet, because this next game is 24 kilobytes, which sounds like a weird size, doesn't it? Yes, this is Escape from the Mind Master, a Starpath supercharger game, a sort of very early flash cart based on cassettes. It had 6 kilobytes of RAM built in instead of the ROM used in most game cartridges, allowing you to load in games from cassette, a much cheaper medium than ROM chips. This first-person view maze game loads in 4 separate sections, making it 24 kilobytes in total. Down again to 18 kilobytes is Dragonstomper, which loads in 3 parts, and it's an RPG. Kudos to the developers for giving this a try. Text is not the Atari 2600's strong point. It has a hard time drawing it. It takes up lots of storage space, but the relatively generous game sizes that the supercharger affords makes it possible. Let's jump down again though to 16 kilobytes and say hi to Stay Frosty 1, as fun as its sequel pretty much, but half the size and without the music. There's also Secret Quest 2, a sort of action RPG-ish thing, like a super light version of Zelda. It is fun though, and it featured Atari founder Nolan Bushnell on the box. He didn't have all that much to do with the game, but Atari, as it was then, thought it would be good for marketing, and well, why wouldn't it be? Also at 16 kilobytes is the stunning Solaris, developed as a sequel to Star Raiders by the original developer Doug Neubauer. It was for a while going to be a Last Starfighter movie tie-in, then well, Atari just sat on it for a while before it was put out as its own thing, Solaris, in 1986. It's a great game in every sense. The original Star Raiders was insanely influential, and this kind of sequel takes the concept even further, having you fly around the galaxy fighting various foes in a strategy arcade mashup. But let's keep dropping, and now we're on to 12 kilobytes, another weird number, courtesy of CBS Electronics, who released 3 games in this format and this one Wings that was prototyped but never released. No relation to the later flight sim of the same name, I think, but well, this is a flight sim and a brave attempt at one on the 2600. There's also Mountain King in this size, which did see release, and along with all these CBS games, benefited from extra RAM in the cartridge, a whole 256 bytes. Reputedly to greatly improve graphical fidelity, although maybe the effects weren't quite as jaw-dropping as the developers had hoped. It is though another nice example of 2600 horizontal scrolling, but well, we need to keep getting smaller, don't we? And soon we start getting into really old school stuff, but before that, one stop at 10 kilobytes with the incredible Pitfall II. One of the 2600's most revered classics, a full platforming adventure crammed into what, even at 10 whole kilobytes, is still a tiny ROM, though it does get help from the original DPC chip, without the plus, which stands for David Patrick Crane, the Activision founder and Atari wizard himself. This is the original chip which inspired the much more powerful modern version, and this is the only classic era game to try to do anything like this. As with the modern incarnation, this improves both graphics and sound with a separate 2K databank, but I'm not going to get into the details now, but it is a very fine game indeed. But dropping down again to 8 kilobytes, we have a lot to choose from, a lot. This was a common size for games on the 2600, but H.E.R.O is unmissable, my own personal favourite Atari 2600 game of them all. It's a kind of exploration platform game with very cleverly thought out controls. The 2600 has just 4 directions and a single fire button on the joystick, but somehow this game manages to get you to walk, fly, lay dynamite and fire a laser, all in a really intuitive way. The game's pretty huge too, with 20 distinct levels. Presumably this is done with procedural generation. That's the only way I can imagine it all fits into 8 kilobytes, but I can't find any specific details about how it actually works. It's a simple effect, but I also love the lighting too. Destroy one of the lamps and everything goes dark, and set off the dynamite and it flashes. Great attention to detail. There is a modern spiritual successor to this from the original creator John Van Ryzin, but it's also published by Audacity Games, and they want $60 for it as well, so yeah, no from me, thanks for the moment. But now let's drop down to 4 kilobytes, and this is where the meat is. By far the most common size, like 80% of 2600 games are 4K. That is the maximum size of ROM that the system could originally handle, and just enough to house recognisable versions of the kind of score attack arcade games that the 2600 was trying to bring home, including Space Invaders here. But it wasn't all arcade conversions. The 2600 had its fair share of original titles like Pitfall, which was by some wizardry crammed into just 4K. This is a bit better documented than H.E.R.O, and yes, there's a very clever procedural generation algorithm that makes this game's 256 screens possible with so little storage. There's absolutely no room to spare in the ROM though, and yes, the one and only David Patrick Crane is responsible for this too, and his insane optimization is the stuff of legend. He really had his work cut out for him fitting this into 4 kilobytes on the 2600. More modern, more complex systems have a lot more resources even if you give them the same size restrictions. More RAM to expand into, maybe an operating system or even just a built-in font can save a lot of space. The 2600 though has none of this. It's got 128 bytes, yes, bytes of RAM, and absolutely no firmware or BIOS or anything like that. But honestly, there's so many great 4 kilobyte Atari games that fit so much in. Far too many to mention. Adventure, another major pioneer, but let's drop down to 2 kilobytes now though and keep it brisk. I don't think there's anything at 3 kilobytes, so 2 has to be the next stop, and this lands us pretty firmly in the very early years of the 2600. All the system's launch titles were just 2 kilobytes, and honestly, they look like it too. Video Olympics is a pleasantly every sport ever in Pong form style game, and there's also the OG Combat, the game the Atari 2600 was built for and around. There's also some third-party games in this size. In fact, the first third-party game ever on any console, Activision's Dragster. Activision really was the king of the 2K niche, with games like the fantastically simple but fun Laser Blast leaving other companies, even Atari, behind. And 2 kilobytes is the absolute lowest end size for commercial games during the 2600's lifespan. There was nothing officially released smaller than this. More modern homebrew games though can let us jump down in size once again to 1 kilobyte, and in a bizarre twist this actually brings us games that are somehow more sophisticated than most of the 2K games, but well, that's progress. This is Jetman, fairly easily recognisable as a riff on the ZX Spectrum classic Jetpack, and it's nicely done. Just 1 solitary kilobyte doesn't seem quite enough for something like this, but it really is 1K. Maybe even more impressive is Hunchy, a horizontal platformer inspired by the classic arcade game Hunchback. It's baffling that Pitfall could fit into 4K, even more so that this can fit into 1. And there's actually quite a few 1 kilobyte 2600 games to choose from, thanks to the mini-games competition from the early to mid-2000s. It seems to be totally dead now, but for a while it was a multi-platform competition that took entries in various sizes, including 1 kilobyte. The 2005 Atari 2600 entries were handily compiled into 1 cartridge, which is still available to buy on Atari Age. Can we drop down again though? Can we get any smaller than this? Well, yes we can, because this is Pong 512 bytes. Yes, Pong in half a kilobyte, created by Atari Age member Wiki Columbus, and yeah, it's got features such as score and a sound and such other features as no other features at all, but hey, you can tell it's Pong because of the way it is. A great achievement though, really, but oh, we can go even smaller. We're not done yet, because this is 256-byte Pong from the same programmer. Pong again, but half the size again, and in red with sound and no score, but who needs to keep score when you're ponging with friends, eh? Interestingly, the original incarnation of Pong, table tennis on the Magnavox Odyssey, was also scoreless, but, well, that's a tangent we don't need to go off on now. We must go smaller again, and let's bring it down to 128-ish bytes with Ram Pong. Yes, it's Pong once again, developed by another big Atari homebrewer, Thomas Genshin. As the name suggests, runs entirely in RAM, the start of a brief trend on the 2600. So let's look at another game of the same size, because I'm a bit fed up with Pong now. This is Ram Helicopter, credited to Rick Scabrina, who I think might be the same Atari Age poster who did 512 and 256-byte Pong. This came out in 2009 and is a kind of pre-Flappy Bird style game, and yeah, just to make it clear, this is loaded from a cartridge into the 2600's 128 bytes of RAM and runs entirely from there, and yes, you can pull out the cartridge and it still works. This and the other RAM games, and there is quite a few, this is RAM Vaders by Bob Montgomery, they all fit into about 128 bytes and that's it. I say about because some of the 2600's RAM has to be unavoidably used in storing stuff needed to run the game, so it is a little less. There's not enough room in any of these games for a numerical score, and certainly not any kind of complex graphics, although RAM Pong and RAM Combat keep score with a moving line. Could this be the end though? Anything less than 128 bytes? Can we possibly go any lower? Yes, we can, but whether we should is another matter, because this is Atari Basic programming. Yes, a basic programming cartridge for the Atari 2600 from 1979, and probably the most useless programming language ever. There may be some joke programming language out there that is worse, but even intentionally abstruse and bizarre languages like Intercal and Visual Basic usually work better than this. The two main problems are that it's terrible and it's awful. No, actually, the two main problems are 1, the user interface, which is totally baffling, and 2, the total lack of memory, because this is using just the 2600's RAM to store the basic code in, giving you just 11 lines of code at maximum, or 63 bytes free, each one storing a different command or variable. Yes, you don't even get the full 128 bytes, half of it is used just running the basic interpreter. And that's why I'm torturing myself with this, the possibility of a game that fits into even less space. You see, I found this fascinating listing of, so-called games for Atari Basic online from someone called Dave Britton, who was still wrestling with Atari Basic in 2001 for some reason. I had a fun evening typing in this and debugging it, optimistically titled Balloon Catcher. Move the white block over the orange block and be rewarded with a beep if you manage it. That's the general thrust. There's no score, but that's one of the many things we've had to divest ourselves of on this journey. It does manage to feature a sort of random number generator, and you might be able to stretch the definition of game to include this, and at 41 bytes, you won't find anything smaller, I don't think. Yes, it requires the 4 kilobyte Atari Basic cartridge to run, but come on, I think that still counts, and this absolutely has to be the end. The games get no smaller than this anywhere. Actually, we can jump down one last notch, but it's not to a game. There is this 32-byte scene demo for the 2600 called Hard 2632, which uses not a ROM chip but dip switches to store the code. It's just this simple animation, but 32 bytes is not a lot in anyone's money, and yes, it's not a game, but I couldn't resist putting it in, particularly as setting 256 dip switches has to be the only data entry method more annoying than Atari Basic's numeric keypads. So this really is the end now. Thanks again to Arcade USA for the Casey's Gold footage. Do check out his channel, it's certainly worth a look. And the usual thanks to my Patreons. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you'd like to join them, there is a link below. That would be great. And now it's time to say goodbye and thanks for watching. But just before the final ending, another shout out to Fume for sponsoring this video. Check out the link in the description or use the QR code with code Chiropolis. Thank you so much to Fume, and one final goodbye to you all.